Yeah, I pretty much the same when people come to Ireland. They're like, "What? I feel ripped off." Okay, so if you're okay, are you?
Ready to roll.
Great,
Yep.
nice one. Okay, good morning, James.
Good morning.
It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I was chatting a little bit with you off air there, and I was saying there's very few books in my life that I thought after reading them it has changed my life, and yours is definitely one of them.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, incredible. Let's get right into it. The book, of course, is called Breath. And if you could, after all your research, all the experts you've spoken to, all the weird and wonderful places in the world you've been to on the subject of breathing, if you could wave a magic wand and change the way, one way we all breathe tomorrow, what would it be?
Breathe less. And I know that seems counterintuitive, but breathe less and breathe slowly. You will be able to do more with that. You will be able to work most efficiently. You'll be able to get more oxygen, more circulation. That seems crazy. It's all true.
So breathe less. And obviously, our preconception is, the more oxygen we get into our body, the better and healthier we are. Explain the breathe less idea.
Well, that's the whole point, to get more oxygen into your body. But when you're breathing more, when you are over breathing, you are doing the exact opposite. And I can demonstrate this right now. If you're sitting somewhere, even if you're driving, maybe not if you're driving, if you're sitting at home, you can take about 10 very big breaths. If you keep taking those breaths, you might feel some tingling in your fingers. You might feel lightheaded. That is not from an increase of oxygen to these areas. It is from the exact opposite, a decrease of circulation. Because when we breathe too much, we cause vasoconstriction to these areas. So this is so contradictory. It took me months to get my head around, but this is exactly how the body works.
So what are the effects of us all breathing too much then? And how important is it to breathe through our nose and not our mouth?
Well, the effects are, look around, look at public health right now. So many populations of people who have chronic maladies, be that asthma, anxiety, even depression. These people traditionally breathe way more than they need to. They are breathing above their metabolic needs. And for the rest of us, what that's causing us to do, it's causing our heart to work harder. It's causing our other systems in our body to compensate for that over breathing. And we can do that. We can keep ourselves alive, but that doesn't mean we're keeping ourselves healthy. After a while, it's going to start to break us down. You can look at other chronic maladies, even metabolic disorders, and so many of them are associated with poor breathing. So by breathing as closely in line with your metabolic needs as you can operate more efficiently. You can allow your body that time to relax and to help heal itself. And that's what I've seen in dozens and dozens of people through several years of researching this subject.
So the question is, how do we do it? Like, what's the magic key? Because in your book, you talk to all kinds of wonderful pulmonauts, as you call them, these pioneers of breathing, and everybody's got their own take on breathing. So for the average person, what simple things can we do to correct our breathing and give our bodies a chance to heal and perform at the optimum level?
The first thing you have to do with breathing is to become aware of it. So a lot of people think, breathing, what is this? I don't even have to think about it. What a wonderful thing that our bodies have evolved in such a way that we don't have to think about it. But once you become aware of your breathing, specifically, you can become aware of how dysfunctional you're breathing throughout the day. And this is very easy to self-diagnose. Once you become aware of it, you can start to fix it. So the first thing that I found people, researchers suggest you do is breathe through the nose. And a lot of people might think, well, of course, that's obvious, breathe through the nose. But a large population might think, why would I bother breathing through the nose? That's why I have a mouth. I can just breathe through that. But by breathing through the mouth, you are not filtering air, you are not humidifying air, you're not pressurizing air, and you're not removing particulate and other pathogens. So you are exposing your lungs to everything in your environment. The lungs can almost be considered as an external organ when you're mouth breathing. And if you live in a city like I do, you're exposing them to all kinds of pollutants and allergens and everything else. So the nose is this wondrous organ that can filter and heat and humidify and condition air so that by the time it reaches the lower lungs, those lungs can be able to extract oxygen so much more efficiently. 25 to 50% of the population chronically mouth breathes, and that is very bad news.
Hmm. But a lot of people, myself included, have difficulty breathing through our noses. And in fact, I was kind of nervous coming on camera with you here on the Zoom call because I said he's going to be judging me if my jaw drops open. He's going mouth breather. But I have a deviated septum in half of my nose, which means it's difficult to breathe through a nostril. So what do people do if their noses are compromised and they find it difficult to breathe through their nose?
When I was first beginning this research, I took a CAT scan of my sinuses to see how I rated. And Dr. Jayakar Nayak at Stanford looked at it and laughed. You never want your doctor to laugh at you, especially when he's looking at a scan, and said, "You are a perfect candidate for nasal surgery. I am so tragically messed up. I've broken this poor thing numerous times. My sinuses are congested. The bones are all deformed, all kinds of stuff." So he told me that 75% of the population has a septum that is clearly deviated, that is clearly visible to the naked eye.
So
So
to
this
people who
idea,
don't understand what a deviated septum is, this is the passage of air in your nose. You've got two of them either side, for one for each nostril. Um,
this, this is the barrier between the nostrils, the right
mm,
and left nostril. Exactly right. And when it's deviated, which means when it's crooked, it can tend to block one nostril more than the other one. And mine, looked like, a hairpin turn. It was severely deviated. And I didn't want to do surgery. I'd heard some stories about that. And what he had found, so this idea when people say, I have a deviated septum, I need to have surgery right now. That's not always true. Some people absolutely do need surgical interventions, but not always. I went down the hall at Stanford and talked to a breathing therapist by the name of Ann Kearney. She had a severely deviated septum. She was a mouth breather. She was slated for surgery and found that the nose is really a use it or lose it organ. We all are messed up in the nose, the vast majority of us. But the less we use it, the more it's going to close up. She looked at patients who had laryngectomies, holes drilled in their throats.
mm.
She found that between 2 months and 2 years, their noses were completely blocked, 100% blocked. And she felt the same thing happening in her own body. So by using the nose more, by using what we were given here, we can help tone those passages, we can help open up those tissues, and so many of us can breathe better. I don't want to use that as a blanket statement. Some
Mm.
people need surgical interventions, but the vast majority, they were saying, do not.
Do the nostrils have different roles in terms of, does air going into, say, your left nostril do one job and the air going through your right nostril do another?
Yeah, so you don't predict that you're going to be stumbling across this weirdo stuff when you're writing a book about breathing. At least I didn't. But I learned from Jayakar Nayak that the nostrils are covered with an erectile tissue. And this is the same erectile tissue as you know where, in our genitals. And it acts the same way. So our nostrils will become engorged with blood. That tissue will become firm and will block air from one nostril to the other throughout the day. And they do this cycling, this shifting every day of our lives. Every 30 minutes to 3 or 4 hours, one nostril is going to open. I believe my right is open now as the other gently closes. There's sometimes where both are almost even, but for most of the time, it's just shifting. It's like walking with your feet, one foot in front of the other, over again.
Hmm.
And for a long time, researchers wondered, they said, why would our bodies evolve this habit of cycling the nostrils? We found in the past about 20 years that breathing through the right nostril has a stimulating effect. Blood pressure is going to increase, circulation is going to increase, it's going to heat your body up. Breathing through the left nostril is going to cool your body down, it's going to calm yourself, heart rate's going to go down. So it's interesting that our bodies likely, no one's absolutely proven this, but if you look at the science here, that our bodies are probably shifting our air to balance ourselves throughout the day. And when we're breathing through the mouth, we get none of those benefits.
Mm. The erectile tissue in our noses definitely gives a different slant to the old Pinocchio tale. Anyway, um, uh,
You know, I hadn't thought about that. Just gonna leave that right there and try to get that image out of my head.
yeah,
Right.
you won't be reading it to your kids anymore, that's for sure. But you know, part of the process of teaching ourselves to breathe through our nose is is mouth taping. And you know, I've heard of sports people who have run marathons with their mouths taped. We've been trying it since your book. Myself and my wife have been taping our mouths shut at nighttime. It hasn't done much for the romance, I've got to say, but it definitely does make a difference. It can be slightly off-putting, but we're determined to become full nose breathers. So, I mean, do you recommend taping up your mouth at nighttime?
I'm just trying to get that Pinocchio thing out of my brain right now. So I'm just really trying to focus as much as I can. It's still there. Anyway, moving on, talking about nighttime. So I had heard about this years ago of mouth taping, and it sounded completely sketchy to me. Because I associate taping the mouth with a hostage situation, with maybe some weird bondage, Pulp Fiction stuff, none of which particularly appeal to me. If they appeal to other people, that's, it's a beautiful thing. Go for it. But I did not want to do that at night until I heard from a doctor of speech language pathology at Stanford. She said, I prescribe this to all my patients. Then I talked to another doctor, Dr. Mark Burhenny, who said, for the last few decades, I've been prescribing this to even kids and adults, and it has a tremendous effect. Because if we're breathing through our mouth to a third of our life, okay, we're exposing ourselves to all of those pathogens, everything in the air. Not only that, when you mouth breathe, the soft tissues in the back of the throat tend to come forward. So just by opening your mouth right now, you're going to feel your tongue kind of shifting back. That's going to help block your airway. By closing your mouth, you're going to feel that tongue go to the upper palate. That's going to open that airway. So many people are suffering from snoring and mild or even moderate sleep apnea. A lot of that, I'm not saying all of it, but at least some of that, I shall be more fair here, is due to the pathway in which they're breathing. So after hearing from these researchers and seeing the effects of this stuff, I'm just pulling a little piece of tape here. I learned that the best way of doing this is not to use a fat, like duct tape hostage strip. You go on YouTube. Actually, don't go on YouTube, anyone. There's some guy who has 9 pieces of tape on it, like every night. So what you need is a piece that, the size of a postage stamp, even smaller than that. I can use half of it here. And you want to put that on your lips. A lot of people say, oh, you have a beard, you can't mouth tape. Well, just watch me. I've been doing it for years. You just put it on your lips. I can even still talk to you. I can breathe if I want. If I want to take this off, I use my tongue, comes right off. So there's no danger to that. What you're doing is you're just training that jaw to be shut at night. It's not about sealing off air. It's training the jaw to be shut. And this can have an enormous effect on health. I'm getting dozens and dozens of emails from people who have had snoring for decades, who have sleep apnea, who have been taping. And because of that, because that airway is opening, they're able to sleep better. And the best part is it's free and anyone can do it.
I like how you describe it in the book. The instructions is if you imagine you had a Hitler's mustache and it just slipped down onto your lips. So that kind of size of tape. I can't seem to keep the tape on at night. My wife hasn't budged and mine is lost somewhere deep in the pillows. But can poor breathing lead to anxiety? That's a massive issue for a lot of people. Could breathing be one of the causes of anxiety or poor breathing?
Can absolutely exacerbate attacks. So right now, if don't do this driving, if you're sitting at home comfortably, you can just try to overbreathe and keep overbreathing that way. What you're doing when you overbreathe is you're associating your body, you're alerting it that there is a threat around. What do we do when we're scared? We enter into the sympathetic fight or flight mode. So we can either run really fast or we can have more energy to fight. So that is sympathetic stress, more adrenaline, norepinephrine. So they've found that populations of asthmatics and people with anxiety tend to mouth breathe. They also tend to breathe way too much. And by simply slowing down their breathing, there's a great study by Dr. Alicia Miret at Southern Methodist University where she was monitoring the breathing of people with both asthma and panic. And she was able to see a panic attack an hour before it came on by looking at the rate of breathing, by looking specifically at the CO2 levels. So when these people would feel this coming on, they would just stop and slow down their breath. A lot of people might say, oh, this is psychosomatic, it's a placebo effect. It is not. This is a physiological response that you are having. And we know that it is so powerful for anxiety, panic, and asthma. The science is very clear about that.
Mm. With all these things, these nuggets of wisdom, we seem to have to rediscover them a lot of the time. And of course, thousands of years ago, a lot of this stuff was already known. It just hadn't been correlated in any kind of scientific forum. Could you tell us the study that I just found fascinating in the book, the one that happened at the turn of the millennium there? And it was about the rosary being compared to the Buddhist chant and what they found when they analyzed both.
So some Italian researchers led by Luciano Bernardi had found that the rosary, the Latin version of that, to recite it, because this is call and response with the priest and then the congregation responds to it, it takes about 5 to 6 seconds. They found 5.5 seconds to recite one phrase of the rosary. Then you have about 5.5 seconds to inhale. They thought, oh, this is interesting that it's so balanced. And then they looked at the Buddhist mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, and which is one of the most famous Buddhist mantras there is. It's about 5.5 seconds to recite that. When you're reciting, when you're vocalizing, you are exhaling. And then about 5.5 seconds to inhale. Then they started looking at Om. Om. Anyone who's been in yoga has done that one. Same time period. Satanama, Kundalini chant, same thing. So across cultures, they all developed these prayers that became extremely popular in their specific cultures, but they were all having people breathe in this very specific pattern. So they brought in a bunch of subjects, covered them with sensors, and they looked at what happened when they recited these patterns. And they looked at what happened when they just breathed in this pattern. They found oxygenation increased in the brain, circulation increased, heart rate decreased, and all the systems of the body entered a state of what is called coherence, where everything was working at peak efficiency. And it's fantastic looking at these readouts of before people are breathing like this, the readouts, respiratory system, heart rate, blood pressure, all over the map. Then you start breathing this way, and there's these beautiful sine waves. And you can see this if you have a heart rate variability monitor, which a lot of people do now. Breathe at this rate of about 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out, and you'll watch your body just enter the state of coherence. And when your body is operating at peak efficiency, it then has time and energy to do a bunch of cleanup work to help heal itself, which is why this breathing method has now been used by doctors to treat things like anxiety, panic, asthma, on and on and on.
I just got such a kick out of that study because I remember as a child being dragged to the novena, which is the Catholic religious festival every summer, and it as a child you couldn't imagine anything worse or more boring because it was just these repetitive prayers and lots of old people who seemed to be in a kind of a mumbling trance. But now when you know the science behind it, no wonder they were so into it. It was essentially their meditation, and when they came out of that church, not only did they feel sort of spiritually cleansed, but their bodies were feeling huge benefits of it. And, you know, that's why they kept going back for more.
For sure. That's likely one of the reasons. And the researchers said that reciting this way, in these ways, and breathing in this way likely made them more receptive to the more powerful message. So you can pray if you want. You can pray in Buddhist chants, through the rosary, through Kundalini chants, whatever, but you don't need to get the real benefits of this practice. So this is good for Satanists to Christians or whomever, because they
Yeah.
all breathe, right?
Yeah.
And so you can breathe in a certain way and get these profound benefits. I want to be clear, that's not to turn anyone off from praying. Absolutely pray if you're feeling benefits from that. But it's the respiration that's playing such a large role in this.
Mm. I love, your backstory. One thing about your book that's so engaging is that you just have this insatiable curiosity and this hunger for knowledge. And you kind of get the feeling when you read your book, it could be on any subject, but you would just doggedly track down everybody who ever knew anything about it. What was the thing you did before all this? A doomed surfing expedition you went on. What was that?
Yeah, and just to speak to the breathing research, I think that what got me so curious about it is early on, I started talking to professors of medicine, pulmonologists, other people who had told me repeatedly, how we breathe doesn't matter. So breathe through your nose, breathe through your mouth, breathe 25 times a minute, 6 times a minute. The body will always compensate, which is true. The body will compensate. But again, compensation is not health. And it wasn't until I started exploring much more deeper in this field, talking to people at Stanford, at Harvard, University of Penn, who have studied the stuff for decades, that I learned how we breathe absolutely matters. And it's so easy to measure how much it matters and what the impact has on it. So
Mm.
it became a bit of an obsessive journey. Every night I was reading breathing books, every day. I just wanted to find the truth behind all of this, because there's a lot of how-to books, and those are great, but there weren't a lot of, like, what does this really do to our body? What does the science really say? Where does this stuff come from, and how can I benefit from it? And so it was in a bit of, my poor wife had to deal with me for a couple of years, just thinking and reading about breathing all the time. But before that, yeah, I was working on some easier projects. By that, I mean writing about sports and sports science and fitness science. And I spent a month in Norway trying to find some rogue waves with some other hooligans, which was an interesting experience and a great way of seeing that country.
Yeah. Have you ever tried surfing in Ireland?
Donegal, I hear, is quite the place, right?
Yeah,
It's
Donegal, Sligo, County Clare, great beaches, great waves.
I would love to, because what I've found, I live in California, so many people out here all the time. I'd much prefer smaller, less crowded waves. I don't care if the water's cold, if the skies are gray. Give me that any old day and I'm into it.
Yeah. I first came across you on the Joe Rogan podcast, actually, and that's what got me into you. I mean, you spoke for over 3 hours about this topic, and I'm jealous because I don't have that much time with you. But I just yeah, that's what got me into it. That's why I tried your book, and that's why I didn't put your book down till I'd read it cover to cover. What is it like to go on a podcast that huge, where literally you've got 8 million people listening to you talk about breathing? What's the next day like, just as a matter of interest, with that level of exposure instantly? Does it change anything? Do you suddenly have a million extra followers the next day, or how does it manifest?
Well, Joe's a real pro. So you go into his compound, because it's not a studio. It's this compound the size of a football field. And he shows up late and he says, "Hey, man, love the book. Let's go." Sits you down. You expect some chit chat, puts on his headphones, says, "I'm rolling," and you're on. So there was zero preamble to get nervous about anything. And where he's the real master is, you're not in front of an audience. The last thing I was doing was thinking that 10 million people are going to be listening, dissecting every single thing I
Yeah.
say, looking for the point where you're off by a fraction of a decimal point, and then writing all over social media about that. No, I was not thinking of that. He's such a personable guy. Sitting across from him, really fell into the conversation, and he is so curious and asks good questions. So the day after, of course, I was just hitting my head against the wall thinking, I massively screwed up. I should have mentioned this. He needs to know about this. How can I be such an idiot? Because he's down in Los Angeles. I can't fly down there. I had to drive down, do the show, and drive back. That's about a 7-hour drive. So I had a lot of time to hate
Yeah. God, yeah, I can imagine. But it's still it's great exposure, worldwide exposure, and I'm not surprised. But I mean, even if you didn't have that, the book speaks for itself. We have one thing in common in that we both like classic cars. I don't have a collection; I just have one. I've got a 1986 Saab, and I believe you have an old Merc that runs on some kind of strange fuel.
Yeah, I have a 300D 78 running on vegetable oil as often as I can. That's getting a little harder because you get it from restaurants, and there's no real restaurants open in San Francisco now. But I love old cars. There's a simplicity to them, especially these old Mercedes, which are just, they sound like tanks, they drive like tanks, they run like tanks. And I've always had old cars. It's an affliction now.
Yeah, I wonder did that feed into your appreciation for breathing properly and running the efficiency of your body? Because anyone who's ever owned a classic car knows, you can't take any part of it for granted. You have to drive it a certain way. You can't rev it too hard. You can't just burn it every day or it will collapse. So I wonder did some of that appreciation feed into your work?
I first heard about running Benzes specifically off of vegetable oil years ago, maybe 10, 13 years ago, when I was really first starting getting into journalism. I was a very late bloomer in that regard. I was a respectable citizen of the world for a while with a real job and a tie and a suit and all that for a long time. But once I found out that this was possible, I researched the history, and it turned out the first diesel engine was designed to run on waste vegetable oil, on peanut oil. And then the gas companies got involved and they said, whoa, 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 this is bad news. So this guy, Rudolph Diesel, mysteriously died, and all diesels were run on petrol from then on out. So it's that process of really looking several layers deep into a story that I
Mm.
found fascinating and thrilling. This is a treasure hunt, right? And that's how I approached the breathing book. I said, wait, we've been told all this stuff. It's obviously wrong. The science is very clear, and yet we still believe that. Why is it? What happened in our society or our culture or in science to make this predominant belief, which we know is wrong, so widely known throughout society? So it's so funny you mentioned that, because that was the first big magazine story I did, and it really set me off on this research journey to go as deeply and as far as I can go into each of these subjects and to try to find the truth there.
Mm. I think anyone who watches the video of the Zoom call will see the difference in our intellectual capacity, because just merely by the bookshelves behind us. I mean, you're wall to wall books, and I got like Iron Man and 3 books and a spaceship from Battlestar Galactica. I better work on my collection.
There's a whole other floor of the house that has more of this crap. So, all you need is a couple really good books. Back in the day, they just had a Bible. That was it. You want to read a book? There's your Bible.
Yeah.
So I like your approach, the minimalist approach.
So let's just recap for people listening now. Quick changes they can make. Like the one thing your book does and this conversation sparks is you start to become aware of how you breathe. And since I read your book, I'm obsessing about it. I can't stop. Every moment I'm trying to breathe in for 5.5 seconds, let it go for 5.5 seconds. I'm doing it while I'm driving. I'm putting tape on my mouth. I'm making sure I'm breathing through my nose. So what are the little nuggets, just to recap, little exercises people can take with them today that hopefully will set them on the right path?
So first of all, I would highly suggest do not do what you do. Do not become obsessive and start hating yourself for being a half a second off. This is the wrong thing to do.
Too late.
The point is to relax yourself. So if you're breathing at a rate that's more comfortable, it's maybe 7 times a minute or 8 times a minute. Stick with that and maybe try to reduce it a little after that. But don't be obsessed with your watch or your phone. Listen to your body and what your body wants to do. Yes, you should be breathing more slowly. Yes, you should be breathing more deeply, engaging that diaphragm. And yes, most of the time you should be breathing less than you think you need to. Again, that seems so crazy. You can really tell by a pulse oximeter. A lot of people have those nowadays. By breathing less, you can see your oxygen actually go up. So I think starting with that foundation, this shouldn't feel like work. You should do it in a relaxed way. Um, Breathing less, breathing through the nose, exhaling fully, because the only way to get in a very enriching deep breath in is to exhale. You have to empty that air before you inhale it once again. And approach this stuff, not as work. This isn't asking you to go on a keto or paleo diet or run 10 miles a day. We carry our breathing with us all day long, and you can adjust your breathing and you can improve it no matter what you're doing. And as the science is very clear, you can share in some massive benefits from just adhering to some simple breathing practices.
Love it. James Nestor, the book here is beside me. It's called Breath and is the new science of a lost art. I can't recommend it enough. Absolute pleasure to talk to you. And hopefully we'll get you over to Ireland for a surfing weekend soon.
I would love that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Cool.